if there's not existing demand, you almost want to already have either strong product market fit or at least strong product market fit signals before you start running ads, and especially paid search. Like if there's not existing demand already, paid search is you're just setting the money on fire. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to put 10K into paid ads and then I'm going to increase the investment when I start seeing a return. That's a recipe for failure. What you need to say is, okay, we have 10K to play with. What's the maximum audience segment we can afford with that 10K to fully saturate? If your ad creative isn't resonating with the audience or that it's not grabbing their attention, then it doesn't matter how good your targeting is and how often you get the ads in front of people, they're not going to remember who you are.
We've never been able to make paid ads work for us. That is something you hear a lot when you're talking to SaaS founders. So today we're going to talk about why your paid ads aren't working and how to fix this. My guest is Patrick Cumming. He's the head of marketing at KlientBoost. KlientBoost is a performance marketing agency. They say they can squeeze more ROI from your paid ads and other marketing channels, and is currently helping over 250 clients in SaaS or e-commerce. Next to running the marketing department, Patrick is the co-host of the podcast KlientBoost Kitchen, the B2B marketing show where they share bit-sized marketing recipes. Before joining KlientBoost, he has been at different agencies where he gained more insights from the kitchens of many B2B brands and their marketing strategies. And if he's not in a kitchen of a SaaS company, he will be in an actual kitchen, as he loves to cook as well. Let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thanks for having me, dude.
We're going to dive right in. What are the biggest myths SaaS founders believe about running paid ads, specifically on Google and LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's hard to narrow this down because I think there's so many myths out there. Probably the most dangerous myth is that the buying journey is linear. So that a user is going to click an ad, they're going to go to a landing page, and then they're going to book a demo, and then they're going to convert to a customer. I think the world we live in now, the buying journey is much more complex and has more touch points. You know, it's almost like I've seen lots of diagrams where it's kind of described as just a jumble, and that's really how the buying journey is. So they need to optimize for that. Another one that I hear a lot is if your prospects see your ads too many times, you irritate them. My counter is always, it's better to have one irritated prospect than 100 almost customers. And I would actually say it's to some degree better to annoy them a little bit, then at least you'll be remembered. So it's much more likely that you're going to actually make it to that kind of vendor shortlist when somebody's looking for a new solution. And then probably the final one, I would say, is that you need a big audience to do it. And I would actually say on the flip, sometimes it can work much better with a small audience, especially for those younger SaaS companies with smaller budgets. A small audience is ideal because you just won't have the available resources to effectively target a big audience anyways.
Nice. And we're going to dive deeper into some of the things you just mentioned. One other mistake a lot of SaaS companies make, like why do most B2B SaaS ad campaigns fail to actually generate real ROI in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a good one. And so on the KlientBoost Kitchen podcast, I recently did an episode exactly on this. I have it in a hierarchy of like top to bottom, what I think are the top reasons. The number one, especially for younger SaaS companies, is targeting. And that can be targeting from multiple different perspectives, right? You could just be targeting the complete wrong audience because you just don't have the kind of skin in the game to really deeply understand who is the ideal prospect for me or who is the actual decision maker at this company that I need to go after. But then another mistake that they'll make is just targeting too many people as well. And so what that looks like is they'll go after their entire total addressable market when they, again, just don't have the resources to actually effectively penetrate that market. And that will just lead to, we call it like whispering in the Grand Canyon. Nobody's going to hear you and it's not going to be effective. So I would say that's probably the biggest place. But then also cascading down from that, it's really a reach and frequency problem. So we have this saying internally at KlientBoost, marketing is really just a game of reach. It's about reaching as many target prospects as possible, as often as possible, so you're remembered as they transition from out market to in-market. Yeah, I typically recommend companies shoot for, it's very difficult to do, but of your total audience, 80% audience penetration, your ads are reaching 80% of the audience you're going after, and then a 10 ad frequency minimum. So that means they're seeing at least 10 ads, usually over 1 to 2 sales cycles. So if you say an average sales cycle is 60 days, you'd want 80% of your audience seeing an ad 10 times or having an opportunity to see an ad 10 times over that period. And then probably there's a few more, but probably the other one that's most common is also just creative. So if your ad creative isn't resonating with the audience or that it's not grabbing their attention, then it doesn't matter how good your targeting is and how often you get the ads in front of people, they're not going to remember who you are. And so what I typically recommend to companies is to use I have this 5-step framework an ad needs to hit in order to be effective. First one and most important is just that it's relatable. And by that, it means that it needs to relate to a common pain point that the audience suffers or a common scenario that they undergo. They need to read the ad and be able to see themselves in the ad. So that's really important. It also just needs to be clear, and you would be surprised how many ads you read and you just have either no idea what the company does or no idea what they're even trying to say, right? The other one is engaging. So you want them to see the ad and want to engage with it. I think that's important. They want to look at it and be like, yep, that's me. I'm going to engage with this because it speaks to me. And then the final two is, and they're kind of together but separate at the same time, but it needs to be memorable. So you want to create an ad that gets remembered, but it's not just enough to be remembered. You also need to make sure it's remembered for the right thing. So the final piece is building associations. You want to make sure it's memorable for the product you serve. An example I use of this is there's tons of people that go viral on TikTok, that go viral on. I was on Facebook yesterday. I very rarely go on Facebook, but I was looking for a new bed on Facebook Marketplace. And so I had a quick scroll through the feed. And there's so many posts with 100,000 likes that are just random people that's not associated to anything and not going to make anybody any money. So it's really important to have that correct association. I'm always thinking when it comes to advertising of 95% of your market, around 95% is going to be out market at any one time, and around 5% is going to be in market. So you can't only optimize for these people because you won't have a future pipeline. That's why it's really important to get that association correct so that when these people move in market, you're the first company that comes to mind, or at least one of the companies that comes to mind.
Nice. Targeting the right audience, not showing your ads enough, creative. These are the mise en place of being in the kitchen, the preparation of actually running the ads.
Yeah, for sure. And that's interesting because if we come back to the number one fails, that's probably one area a lot of companies fail at too, right? Which is not getting that planning stage done correctly. So they're not deeply trying to understand the audiences. They're not trying to deeply understand those pain points because they're so obsessed with speed and trying to get things out quickly. And actually just, taking that extra time to plan, prep, and think about what you want these ads to achieve can be super effective.
One thing I see a lot is when SaaS companies start out, they think like we're going to start running paid ads and get our first clients, but they don't know the right audience. What is, in your opinion, the actual good moment to start with running paid ads?
That's a good question and difficult to answer because it's not always cut and dry and you are going to make some mistakes. And I think that's actually probably one prerequisite I would say is that you should definitely avoid any information or people that are telling you there's an exact formula you can follow that's going to work every single time. It's different for every business. There's some best practices that you'll typically start with. But what I would say is it really depends on the stage of your company and the category within which you are operating. So if you're a B2B SaaS and you are operating in an existing category that already has demand, that's probably an ideal situation to be in from a paid ads perspective, because you can launch something like paid search ads on Google Ads immediately, and there's going to be demand for your product, which providing you have a decent landing page, a decent offer, you should be able to start generating pipeline and inbound very quickly. The more challenging problem is young SaaS companies that are trying to create a new category where there isn't existing demand. That's the really tricky problem. And depending on the amount of budget that they have, I sometimes will even just steer them away from paid ads, because you have to do so much experimentation and you have to iterate so much and fail so much before you find exactly the right way to talk about this product, exactly who you're talking to, that you will almost definitely throw maybe 70% of your ad budget straight in the bin. And so with those companies, I actually say it's probably better that you start with something that's more of a time-intensive strategy, but not a money-intensive strategy. So that's something like cold outbound, for example, getting yourself to events, joining online communities, trying to have those non-scalable one-to-one conversations with different people. Because this is something I always say about SaaS founders is like, I love working. I didn't get to do it too much when I was on the client side, because you would normally be working with, a head of marketing or a CMO or something like that. But when you get there are occasional times where I'd work directly with the SaaS founder, and they're so passionate about their products that I would think, man, I wish I could just distill the way you talk about your product and just inject it into every single campaign. If we can get you on a call with somebody that has a deep need for products, you're going to be able to sell it. So you really want to focus on that as opposed to paid ads, to be honest.
Yeah, and in the end, as you mentioned, if you're creating a new market, the non-scalable channels get you a lot of feedback when creating a new market. You probably want to have those conversations rather than...
Yeah, I would almost say if there's not existing demand, you almost want to already have either strong product market fit or at least strong product market fit signals before you start running ads, and especially paid search. Like if there's not existing demand already, paid search is you're just setting the money on fire.
Let's go back to when paid ads are going to be good for a SaaS brand. And let's say they have some initial success. They have started to run some paid ads. It's super hard to scale them sometimes. What is the number one mistake SaaS companies make while trying to scale the paid ad campaigns?
Yeah, the number one mistake they make is they think budget will scale pipeline linearly. So if you are currently getting, I don't know, let's take a 15K a year SaaS where you're willing to pay 1K to acquire a customer. So you've got a 1K cap for a 15K average deal value. And so they are currently getting, I don't know, maybe 10 deals a month, closed deals a month from paid search. And they think, okay, I want to get that to 20. If I just double my budget, I'll be able to get, 20 closed deals a month. And sometimes that can work, depends on how much demand there is in the market. But most of the time, most SaaS companies have squeezed the existing demand so much that what happens is they double their budget, and then all that happens is that CAC just doubles. They don't actually get any new customers because there isn't any existing demand to capture. So I'd say that's the biggest mistake. And I've also seen brands do that on paid social like LinkedIn ads as well, which is just never going to work because that's much more of a demand generation channel where you're really optimizing for future pipeline as opposed to pipeline right now. So you'll double your budget, but you're probably not going to see the fruits of that doubled budget for maybe 6 months. It's more effective to double the LinkedIn ads budget probably than the paid search budget, but it has a longer lag time. Big mistake they make is not using the ad platforms for what they're best at. Google Ads, especially for long sales cycle, B2B SaaS companies, if your sales cycle is plus 6 months, you have a reasonably high average deal value, say above 5K. Really, Google Ads is only going to be good at demand capture for you, and trying to use it for demand generation is just not going to work. And so what companies will do is that they'll create a pool of keywords that are based on anything my ICP might search, as opposed to anything somebody in market who is also my ICP might search. And the truth is, I think of Google Ads as kind of, it's a jobs to be done channel. So when you go into Google Ads, you already know what the end outcome that you want from that search is going to be. And so if somebody tries to pattern interrupt you, there's maybe a 0.001% of the time that's going to work, but other 99.99%, that's not going to work because you are just not in the mind frame of breaking the goal of what you had in getting to this platform. So I'd say that's the biggest mistake, not using the platforms for what they're best at And that also happens on paid social as well, where they'll launch demo request ads to a cold audience and expect to immediately begin inbound pipeline from day one. And it just doesn't work because, again, if we just remember that 95% of your audience is out market any one time, 5% is in market, it's just pure probability. It's very unlikely that your ads are even going to reach enough in market prospects for that to work. And you also don't have enough skin in the game for them to be interested enough in your brand, familiar enough with your brand, trust your brand enough to go from a cold LinkedIn ad to book a demo, unless you do something absolutely exceptional, which can happen. But I wouldn't, miracles and hope are not strategy.
Exactly. Even if they follow your 5-step framework, relatable, clear, engaging, memorable, building associations, no magic is going to happen even with that.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about the mistakes quite a bit, right? So I guess we now know why a lot of paid ads aren't working. If we turn things around a little bit, as a SaaS company, I now think I still want to invest money into paid ads. I still want to build like a profitable paid ads strategy, maybe even from the ground up. What would you recommend? How should they start? Do you have a framework, a step-by-step process, or something which could help them?
Yeah, for sure. The first place to start is to analyze the data that you have available about your existing customers as much as possible to learn, make sure you're targeting the right people. So it's not about you trying to intuit who you think you should talk to, get the concrete data, who's reaching out to the sales team. So that's the number one. You definitely want to be targeting them, because that's either going to be the decision maker or the person influencing the decision maker. For most SaaS companies, probably the person reaching out is most likely going to be the person that did the research. In some instances, it's probably the case that they maybe got somebody to do research for them beforehand, in which case you need to find out what job titles are doing that research and reach out to them. We're fortunate because we have Gong, which summarizes all the calls. I do this at least every quarter, but sometimes more frequently. You just go through all the closed won deals of the last quarter and look at every Gong summary to find out what are the biggest problems people are having when they come to us. What are the services that they want? Looking for different information that I can use to inject into those ad campaigns. So I'd say that's the fundamental first place to start, is make sure you're going into building it with really strong data, because otherwise it's very expensive to experiment and you still need to experiment, right? That's how to start. I think from there, I tend to recommend much more simplified account structures for companies starting out. So definitely the first place to start for me is always Google ads over LinkedIn ads. And the reason I say that is that it's the best place to find existing demand right now. It's the best place to, if there is existing demand, convert that demand so that you can actually start generating ROI from the get-go. And so that would be my typical recommendation. And I would say, don't use that paid search channel for anything other than high intent keywords. And when I say high intent keywords, I mean something where there's very clearly buying intent within that keyword. And so if we take an example of maybe like a HR tool for an industrial manufacturing company, say that's what you do, I would be looking for examples of people searching for that exact keyword on Google. And then I would be looking for different variations of it. So like HR tool, HR software, HR solution, HR platform, because that keyword is so specific and so long tail. That's a very strong signal that this is an in-market buyer. And so that would be the first place I would start. If there's definitely no demand, again, I would say probably avoid paid ads. But if you're really insistent, maybe you've had a ton of injection from like Series A or whatever, and you've got some cash to play with to get to the next revenue milestone, then I would go for paid social with a view that it's probably going to take 6 months for me to see any sort of return. And I would typically recommend choosing an audience segment you can afford to fully saturate. And the way to find that out is you've got to reverse engineer the math of how those paid ads are going to work. So you can't just say, okay, I'm going to put 10K into paid ads, and then I'm going to increase the investment when I start seeing a return. That's a recipe for failure. What you need to say is, okay, we have 10K to play with. What's the maximum audience segment we can afford with that 10K to fully saturate? And so I'd be doing that math as well. And that's probably one of the most difficult decisions for SaaS companies to make because they get major FOMO, especially when they're young and every piece of revenue is important. They're worried if they don't target every single potential prospect, they'll get none. Actually, the reverse is true. When you try and target everybody with a small budget, you have that effect we talked about earlier, which is whispering in the Grand Canyon. You actually end up not making enough noise to be effective. And then, 3 months go by, 6 months go by, and then they're saying, tried that, didn't work, onto the next strategy.
Yeah, so I guess what a lot of people use as terminology is account-based marketing, right? So I guess this is also what you're referring to. So you have your total addressable market, you take a chunk of that, and then coming back to what you said before, make sure you have the 10 ad frequency minimum, and then you can spend the budget on that segment to saturate them, as you call it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking back to a project I worked on last year. It wasn't completely from scratch. They turned LinkedIn ads on and off a couple of times and paid search on and off a couple of times, but never really been able to make it work. And so what we ended up doing for them is interesting. So we actually started with the paid search strategy, and that it was interesting because that looked really, really hot on paper. So there was a lot of demand for the service that they offered. And we were getting loads of leads. The cost per lead was stupidly low. It's like $20 cost per lead. And this was for like a kind of 10 to 15K a year SaaS product. So it's a decent size. But then actually, this is an interesting one because this is another mistake. And so when they came to us, they didn't have offline conversion tracking in place. And so what offline conversion tracking is a way for you to take CRM data and send that signal back into your ad platform so that you can understand not only who's filling out forms, but who's filling out forms and converting to different pipeline stages like MQL, SQL, maybe TQL for some SaaS companies, and then opportunities in closed one. And so you'll be able to see what in the ad platform is actually driving value. It's interesting because we initially allocated quite a lot more budget to Google Ads. After the first 3 months, we saw, okay, none of this is even converting to qualified opportunities, let alone revenue. And so what we did is we took the budget completely away from paid search, put it all into LinkedIn ads, and went for a really small audience segment, tiny. It was an account-based marketing list, and I think there was about 13,000 people on it. So that's tiny, like a really tiny audience. But we were able to fully saturate that audience. I mean, we were getting like 10 plus frequency. Audience penetration was probably in the region of like 70 to 80%, which is insane. It was a strong strategy from that perspective. And then I worked closely with the head of marketing there, and we back and forth a lot on really deeply understanding what are the key pain points? How can we get that into the ads that we're running? Because the interesting thing was the audience that they were most relevant for they were quietly unsatisfied, but they weren't really looking for new solutions. But when the SDRs could talk to them, they were like, yeah, we hate this about the existing product, and we hate this about the existing product, and we hate this. They're just not aware that other solutions exist. There's this category giant that's been in the space for years and hasn't innovated. We set up a strategy where what we wanted to do was generate interest with high audience frequency, cold targeting, and janky ads. We did Loom videos of the head of marketing. So it's not even somebody that's like an equivalent job title, just talking about different features in the product. And then we supported that with document ads, which were addressing like industry trends. They were addressing some like upcoming big changes in the industry and how to respond to it. And so we were generating some positive association because this was, and when I say like janky content, it was very rough around the edges. One of these document ads it just had a big rubber duck as a picture on the front just to generate some attention, But it worked really well. And then we would retarget those users with lead gen form ads. And it was interesting because we did get some bite from the lead gen form ads. It wasn't huge, but where we saw the most impact was we would hear from the SDR teams that now when they were going on to calls, people had seen these ads and they were saying, oh yeah, we saw this video, we saw this document. They were more receptive to jumping on a call with these SDRs because we'd done this warming process. And then probably the other thing, which is coming back to more mistakes that companies make, is what we did is we used the LinkedIn revenue attribution report to measure the performance of it, as opposed to using like first and last touch attribution. So for anyone that doesn't know this, first and last touch attribution essentially either measures the first click or the last click as the most important touch point, and then attributes all the credit for winning a lead to the platform of the first or last touch. And actually what we know to be true is that there's lots of touch points that happen at the middle that are way more important. And that's what this LinkedIn revenue attribution report does, is it looks at what is the total value of pipeline for companies on this target account list that had either multiple impressions or engagements with ads. It was interesting because we saw way more influenced revenue, but also it was somewhere in the region of, I think, 3 or 4K higher average deal size if somebody had seen an ad versus didn't see an ad. And LinkedIn has the data to show that. They would also convert faster.
That's interesting. So you can know the difference between people seeing the ad and versus not, and then you can actually calculate, would it make sense to go beyond the small market you chose?
Exactly. And it's interesting you say that, because that's honestly how I'd recommend companies to scale, right? Is do this with one small segment first, and then move on to the next segment. Could be like scale industries, could be scale regions, could be scale job titles. But that's, if you're going to start small and scale, that's how you do it, with a small segment, as opposed to trying to do it by starting with a small budget and a big audience and scale. That's definitely going to fail.
Yeah. Are you struggling to find a cost-effective and scalable marketing channel? Check out Reditus. We help you to have other people recommend your SaaS, and you would only pay them when they deliver you paid clients, making it a very cost-effective and scalable marketing channel. Want to learn more? Go to getreditus.com.
Yeah, so summarize a little bit what you said. Analyze the data available, start with Google Ads or LinkedIn Ads, focus on a certain market, saturate it, and then connect your Google Ads platform with your CRM to figure out who actually converts and I guess to what values. This, now I make it sound super easy in 30 seconds. Like, what are some common challenges SaaS companies are going to run into when they even want to try to set this up?
Yeah, if we skip past the just understanding the audience, having product market fit, if we just assume that those have been resolved, because we've already talked about them a little bit, I would say the number one is tracking and measurement. Tracking will probably be the biggest because they won't know how to do it and it's pretty complicated. Fortunately, SaaS companies also usually have pretty technically minded, intelligent people. So there should be somebody in your company that can figure that out. The main thing is coming back to that offline conversion tracking. You absolutely need to have offline conversion tracking in place. I would not even recommend start running ads if you don't have offline conversion tracking in place, because you won't know what's driving value and you won't be able to make the best decisions or feed those platforms the best data to optimize optimally. You're going to need bulletproof tracking on your website. Make sure you're using conversion APIs on LinkedIn and Meta, enhanced conversions, Google Ads, server-side tracking. You can capture it like, I think it's somewhere in the region like 20 to 30% extra conversions you'll capture with server-side tracking. That would be the first challenge, is bulletproof tracking, and then measurement. So I think Google Ads generally, I'm pretty happy for companies to measure that using first or last touch attribution to some degree, because it is more of a demand capture channel. It depends on the company, because we can get away with it at KlientBoost because we have, from the conversion to closed won on Google Ads, that's around 60 days for us. And Google Ads has a 90-day conversion window. But there are some companies where from first conversion to closed won is 12 months, 18 months. So that's from demo request to becomes a customer. The attribution window in Google is only 90 days. So you're not going to correctly attribute the stuff that's actually working. And so for that reason, I kind of recommend to a lot of companies, they need some form of measurement tool that bridges the gap of things they can't see. Especially important for something like paid social, where oftentimes the people that are going to buy and aren't necessarily the ones engaging with ads. With the rise in kind of people rejecting cookies, ad blockers, just general like Safari, which I think doesn't even track users or whatever, it's also much harder for these ad platforms to connect users to the conversion. So I think looking at some research recently that estimated on average, you probably only see about 70% of total conversions in ad platforms. I don't have data on this, but my gut tells me for long sales cycle B2Bs, I think that's probably even less. I think it's probably more like 50%. So yeah, you'll need some form of tool to bridge that gap. I tend to recommend Dream Data is pretty good for it. So Dream Data is a hybrid between, it's called data-driven attribution. But what they can do is they have a complex machine learning algorithm within their attribution software that will track the full user journey over, up to 2 years. So I've seen some deals in the most recent analysis I did for us where the first ad impression was like 2 years ago. And so what Dream Data can do is it can analyze all of your deals to understand what's the likelihood that an ad view does or doesn't increase the likelihood that somebody is going to convert, for example. And then it can give you a influenced value figure so that you can really understand what's actually influencing value and what isn't. That's not perfect because it's not an unflawed system, but it allows you to make more considered decisions in terms of where to place your budget, which channels to scale, what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, what you're saying why a lot of paid ads aren't working for SaaS companies right now is they're not measuring everything which is happening from the paid ads, which is, if you say 50 to 70% is being tracked right now, then they could be profitable. They could actually generate revenue. You just don't know about it.
Yeah, and there's lag time as well, right? So this is something I've seen a couple of big name influencers, I'm not going to name names, but people would definitely know who they are, bragging they turned off their ads at the beginning of the year and they actually grew for the following 3 months. And that makes total sense to me because if I just think of KlientBoost's our own conversion to pipeline to closed won stats. So from conversion to closed on paid social, that's 100 days for us. So if I turned off paid social today, I'm not going to actually see the drop in performance for 100 days. On Google Ads, it's 60 days. So if I turn off Google Ads today, I'm not going to see the drop in performance for 60 days. So there's also the fact that you don't even see the dip until it's almost too late. And then you've got to build back up. And that usually takes twice as long. What I do say to a lot of companies is you have to trust a little bit. So if you turn on and have the best quarter you've ever had, and the growth rate's above what your growth rate was previously for the year, that's also a signal to pay attention to, even if you can't directly attribute. I also tell companies to look at correlation. When I first broke into marketing, I was working with a company where we were running programmatic display ads. And this wasn't actually a B2B SaaS company that was selling hardware as opposed to technology. And what we could measure was that whenever we ran programmatic ads, there was an exact equivalent uplift in revenue from the website, but there was no attribution, zero. Like there was no revenue attributed to these programmatic ads because that is, I guess, more of a brand salience channel, building positive associations. So you remember it and then you come back to it later. And so they ended up canceling the contract and cutting the programmatic ads because the CEO just didn't believe it worked because he couldn't see the direct attribution. We have 3 years of data. There's an exact uplift and decrease in revenue. You need to pay attention to that. It's telling you the truth.
Nice. What is your approach, view on, because I know you also help clients with SEO. So what is your view on paid social or paid search versus organic traffic?
Yeah, a loaded question, especially now in the age of AI. For us, SEO is still, organic search is still pound for pound, the highest ROI channel that we have at KlientBoost. It's like to an insane degree, right? But it took a lot of work to get there. We have a huge library of content on the website. It's monstrous, like it's ginormous. And it took a lot of work and it took a lot of time, to rank, took a lot of time to build the domain authority. And it takes, once you get it to a point, it takes less to maintain it. But we actually didn't maintain it enough for maybe the 18 months prior to me jumping into this head of marketing role. And we did see a huge dip as a result. And so we then went back and did a kind of optimization strategy and were able to reclaim quite a lot of SERPs positions. But most SaaS companies aren't in that position. My POV is organic search can definitely work. It's going to take longer. unless you're in a not very competitive market. So if you're going after hyper niche keywords that there's not a lot of competition for, you probably could make it work. The way I would approach it is I would start with paid search and use learnings from paid search to influence the SEO strategy. And when it comes to paid social, again, these things aren't really an either or for me, and it does depend on the actual situation. But paid social is going to enhance your SEO efforts, especially on paper, because a lot of the organic traffic that you get is going to be coming from brand name searches. And brand name searches don't increase by accident. They increase because your brand becomes more popular. And so paid social is one of the ways that you do that as well. And SEO also uses kind of brand strength as a signal when ranking anyways. So my POV isn't either or. It's just you have to analyze it within the specific situation that you're in. So if I had to give a rule, if there's low competition, high value keywords, probably makes more sense for a SaaS company to focus on SEO right now because it'll be cheaper and give them a better return than paid ads. But if that's not the case, it would be much better to go with paid ads and then use the insights from paid ads to feed into an SEO strategy that they can then afford to do a little bit slower over a longer period of time.
Yeah, because in the end, paid search is going to help you to experiment quicker, get the learnings quicker, and then you can build like a proper SEO foundation. What is like a big risk or maybe big opportunity looking now, I guess, with all the things going on with AI 2025? What should we prepare for?
Tracking will get harder. Privacy concerns are growing. So more people are adopting ad blockers, more browsers are becoming privacy first, and just in general, it's getting harder to track people. On top of that, ad platforms are also becoming more of a black box and trying to retain more of the information for themselves, especially because, it's like IP for them that they can productize and make more money from. So it doesn't make sense for them to give as much data to advertisers because they want you to be dependent on them. And so that makes it very, very difficult, especially for Facebook and Google ads. They make most of their money from e-commerce. The black box things like PMAX or broad audiences on Facebook do not work for B2B SaaS companies at all because there's not big enough markets or enough data being fed into the algorithms to make them work. And so trying to work around that is very difficult. And what it means is marketing fundamentals and brand strength are going to be huge differentiators going forward. So it's almost like the biggest risk is that you become too reliant on pushing buttons in platforms when really what you should be reliant on is deeply understanding your audience, knowing their pains, gains, and jobs to be done, and creating like really memorable, bold advertising assets and programs that kind of encapsulate that deep understanding of the audience and do that in a way that makes the audience like really love and trust your brand. That's always been huge, but that's especially huge now. I think if I was a young SaaS, I wouldn't be waiting until 5 million ARR or 10 million ARR to start thinking about brand. I would be doing it from day one. And that doesn't mean you have to do huge brand stuff from day one, like try and, do a billboard on Times Square or get a Super Bowl ad. But it does mean that you should be strategically thinking about how do I want the audience to think of me? And also thinking about trying to put out a very consistent message that's hitting some of those 5 creative, steps that I talked about earlier.
We did a lot of podcasts regarding brand authority, creating brand positioning with April Dunn. Check those episodes out. I'm going to ask the most difficult question. If you had to summarize your best advice on paid marketing in 1 or 2 sentences, what would it be?
Oh, that's tricky. Just don't be afraid to be bold and be really bold. You can't err on the side of bold enough. And so as an example, some of our best performing ads are like goofy cartoons with a conversation between a CMO and their existing agency that's underperforming. That is performing insanely well. Or just really crappy memes that look like they've been marked up on Microsoft Paint. They look terrible, but they get loads of engagement because it speaks deeply to the audience. It works really well. Yeah, I think there's this common phrase that's maybe overused, but most B2B ads are beta boring. And so when everybody else is zigging, you really need to zag. And don't be afraid to do that. That would be my biggest piece of advice.
Nice, thanks. We're going to start closing things off. Final two questions, the famous questions. When we talk about growing a B2B SaaS company, what kind of advice would you give a SaaS founder who's just starting out and growing to 10K monthly recurring revenue?
I'd come back to that big question. Is there existing demand for your product? If the answer is no, it's easy to find out. If there's existing demand for your product, people are going to be Googling it. So that's where I'd go. I'd set up a Google Ads account. I'd go into the Google Ads keyword planner, and I would type in as many variations of what I thought somebody who was interested in my product would search as possible to find out if there's existing demand. If there is existing demand, that's a good position to be in. And so I would go after those high intent keywords. Whatever budget I could afford, I would reverse engineer the math just to make sure, okay, Google will tell you the average cost per click is. You can then use some industry benchmarks to understand what's the average conversion rate for my industry to kind of estimate, okay, if I get this many clicks, I should get this many leads. I know my pipeline conversion rates. So if I get this many leads, I should get this many opportunities. That's not perfect math, by the way. And there's lots of professional marketing academics who will tell you not to do that. When you're a young B2B SaaS, that's the best you got. So that's what you've got to do, and then optimize as you go. If there is no existing demand, I would just say don't use ads. I would say don't use ads at all. Do something different. LinkedIn thought leadership, events, build a newsletter, SEO even, but you'll waste too much money early on. If you're really super intent on having some paid ads live, maybe just a high intent retargeting campaign with anyone who's not an ICP for you excluded from that audience. So for us, for example, for our retargeting campaigns, we have loads of exclusions. Like anyone that's not a manager is excluded. Any companies below 10 employees or below 1 million ARR is excluded because it's just not an ideal fit. For us, there's also some other industry exclusions that we do. So like our retargeting audience of high intent prospects is like 5,700, like super small. For most B2B SaaS companies, it'll be even smaller than that. So you can saturate that with a very small audience. And I would just do that with a very strong offer. So I'd look at whatever all of your competitors are offering, beat it. And then also have some ads that just handle common objections that you get, and also what the cost of inaction is. So what is the cost that somebody's paying by not using your product? Have some ads around that as well. And that can work really well. But again, that's only if you're super intent on running ads. If there's not existing demand, I would say, yeah, leave the ads alone.
Nice. Let's assume now we pass 10K MOR and we're going to make a huge step towards 10 million ARR. We can assume there's going to be a product market fit in demand here. What kind of advice would you give a SaaS founder here?
Yeah, I think for this one, like 10 million ARR sounds big, right? And to some degree it is, but it's not so big that you just have endless pools of money to spend. So the first thing is, this is not an excuse to try and target your entire TAM, especially if you're not allocating the right amount of budget to do that. So I think at this stage, what I would probably be doing is looking at what segments are working right now. Look at how can we scale those segments. So, if we've already run some paid ads, is there enough existing demand for us to be able to increase spend on Google Ads? That's easy to work out because you can just look at something called search impression share. Let's say you've got a campaign with all of your core high intent keywords. If your search impression share is 10%, that means you're not showing up for 90% of user searches on those terms. You can probably scale that a lot more, right? Theoretically, you can scale it so that you show up 90% of the time. Not always possible in a high competition ad market, but there's at least some wiggle room there. On the paid social side, I would probably be looking to implement a couple of additional smaller segments. Again, not going for the small TAM. And you can do this. A really good way to do this is to rank your actual existing customers into tier lists. Look at, okay, which industries and job titles are the highest value for us, are the easiest to work with, have the fastest sales cycles, have the lowest acquisition costs, and then build a kind of tier list of, okay, it makes most sense to go after this segment right now, even though we could service these segments. That's the challenge. Yes, you could, but you just want to do best bang for your buck. So I would go for the most valuable segment, implement them first, and then steadily start scaling new segments as opposed to trying to go and do everything all at once. And I think also at this 10 million mark, that's when you can start experimenting with some channels outside of just Google ads and LinkedIn ads, where most B2B SaaS companies will typically start. That's when you can invest in a tool like Primer or Metadata that gives you LinkedIn level targeting for meta ads and Google ads. And then you can start actually getting more audience penetration, because this is again another myth that B2B founders love to say, which is my audience isn't on Facebook or Instagram. And I'm like, there's what, 3 billion users or something? I guarantee you your audience is on there. You just need to be able to target them. You're going to need a third-party audience builder to do that. That's the time when you can start also scaling channels as well.
I think I saw a post that LinkedIn has 31 million users and Facebook has 3 billion. So it can't be true. They're not going to be on Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. They definitely are.
Nice. Let me try to see if I can summarize. So if we talk about paid ads, only 5% is now in-market paid ads help you to come on mind for the other 95%. Why your paid ads actually generating ROI. You're not targeting the right audience. You're not showing your ads enough. So increase your frequency. Focus on, 10 ad frequency minimum and look at your sales cycle. It's better to have one irritated prospect than 100 nut customers. Not having creatives. They need to be relatable, clear, engaging, memorable, building associations. Not tracking the offline conversions. Have bulletproof tracking in place. Only 50 to 70% is tracked by the paid ad platforms. And this topic will become a higher priority even in 2025. If you are creating a new market, you might not even want to run paid ads as you need to experiment too much, which will cost you too much money. So make sure you have product market fit and demand first. If you are going to run ads, analyze the data you have available, find the actual decision maker, the biggest problems, go through call recording, CRM notes, make sure you go after that. Start with Google ads or LinkedIn ads, focus on high intent keywords. Focus on a certain market, saturate them with a great offer, connect your Google Ads platforms with your CRM to figure out who actually converts. And again, not everything will attribute to the ads, but it will help the SDRs to come in hot. So tracking will be super important. When trying to scale, budget won't scale pipeline linearly, and keep using the platforms what they are best at. Find the segments to go after and double down on. Organic search, it still works. It will take longer, but leverage the learnings from your paid search into your SEO campaigns and focus on low competition, high value keywords. And for 2025 and beyond, brand will become more important in the future. Be memorable, be lovable, be trusted, and you can't be too bold with what you're doing. All your words.
Perfect, man. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, if people want to contact you, Patrick, how can they do so?
I'm super active on LinkedIn. I think it's at Patrick-James-Cumming on LinkedIn if you want to follow me on there. Also have our own podcast now that's kind of 10 episodes in, I think, at the moment. So you can find that on Spotify, KlientBoost Kitchen, and then also have a newsletter, the KlientBoost Kitchen newsletter. I run that. You can either find that on the KlientBoost website, klientboost.com/kitchen, or you can actually, I also cross post it on LinkedIn. So you can sign up to that on LinkedIn. Usually comes out every Friday. So yeah, those are the main places. And I would say always down to educate and help out and share information. So if anyone out there's struggling with paid ads, DMs are always open, and I am more than happy to help people problem solve paid ads issues in that channel.
So we're going to make sure people can find you. So we're going to link towards your LinkedIn profile. We're going to link towards your podcast and link towards the newsletter, so they can just click in the show notes and get there. For people listening, if you haven't done so, please just leave us a review in the platform you're listening right now. It just helps us to boost the algorithms. I don't think I have to explain why. And I guess if you're listening on Spotify, just answer the poll we always put in there. Always love to hear what you thought of this episode and what you'd be doing next time. Patrick, again, thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me, dude.
Thank you for watching this show of the Grow Your B2B SaaS podcast. You made it till the end, so I think we can assume you like this content. If you did, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you like this content, feel free to reach out if you want to sponsor the show. If you have a specific guest in mind, if you have a specific topic you want us to cover, reach out to me on LinkedIn. More than happy to take a look at it. If you want to know more about Reditus, feel free to reach out as well. But for now, have a great day and good luck growing your B2B SaaS.